CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.
Welcome to yet another episode on Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Peggy Nkosimoyo. I'm the director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment at the West Business School. We are shooting this episode and several others at the margins of the 9th annual Passa Conference in Cape Town. I'm happy to be joined by Chiedza Chagutah. Before we started, I was asking, what does Chiedza mean?
So Chiedza means the light. But thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. But can we use that name and try and break it down in the philanthropic space?
So for me, I think the point at which I would like to start is a childhood experience that I think has been inherent in how I participate in the philanthropy space, which was when I was growing up, early years of my life. My dad always used to force us to go to our rural village in a place called Gokwe, so no electricity, no water, and I just associated it with difficulty. But I think one of the things that I distinctly remember is how afraid I was of the dark. And I guess because you take electricity for granted, and I just disliked that experience because of the discomfort of having to go out in the dark, walking between my grandparents' huts. And so the light, I think something that we take for granted is something that actually paves the way for philanthropy, in our context today, and has really shaped, who I am and how I've taken on this journey on philanthropy.
Yeah. So in other words, you would see your role and many of other philanthropic institutions as shedding light,
Absolutely.
to others. But also coincidentally, your last name is Chagutah. And again, you're explaining that it means
we are
full. Yeah.
As in we are satisfied,
Right.
we've eaten to
Right.
our food.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, can we apply that name in this sector? Because
and I think I'll take it again back to that experience because often when I was at home, in my parents' home, I never used to think about, what am I going to eat now? Or, the fact that I've left over food. But at my grandparents' house, we all shared the same plate when we're eating, if it's pap and whatever meat stew. We all take turns to pick a piece of meat and your pap. And sometimes you're not full, but that's what's there for that day, and you keep it moving. And so just having a decent meal, things like food security, that feature a lot in the kind of challenges that we want to address in the philanthropic space. Again, make a big difference in terms of education outcomes, in terms of things like gender equality, just in terms of dignity, which I think is a big part of what philanthropy should be contributing to.
Yeah, which would speak directly to, the SDGs around, all the 17, but the principle, leave no one behind. And so when you are full, make sure that others are also full. And so welcome, and I just was fascinated by the name and the coincidences that it creates in the space of philanthropy. So you are with Hlanganisa Community Fund, and I was asking earlier whether this is the former HIVOS that some of us got to know about it. Maybe we can talk a bit about Hlanganisa. What is Hlanganisa? What does it do? What do you seek to achieve? And what are some of the successes that you might want to showcase for people who are watching this episode?
So the full name of the organization is Hlanganisa Community Fund for Social and Gender Justice. We consider ourselves to be an innovative intermediary grant maker that supports community-based organizations that are women rights centered. And our work is really we use a three-chord approach. I like to call it a three-chord approach. Others see it as three pillars. But we disperse small grants to community-based organizations and grassroots movements that are working to achieve social justice. And social justice is the core of our mandate. We seek to enable social justice because we see community-based organizations and grassroots structures as key catalysts in achieving social change. In addition to the grant-making work that we do, we also complement that with capacity building and institutional strengthening of community-based organizations, because again, we see the value in investing in the sustainability of community-based organizations, and for them to also exhibit some of the characteristics that we are looking for in some of our key institutions within government, things like accountability, things like solid systems to manage resources that we've entrusted to them, but also things like leadership development, because leadership is a key area for us in terms of how social change can be achieved. And then the last aspect of our work has to do with strategic sector strengthening, which is really around strategic convenings, and bringing in, the right voices, the right institutions, the right resources with community-based organizations, and sometimes just enabling and facilitating for grassroots activists and organizations to be in the same room with, for example, policymakers that they're seeking to target.
Yeah. So what would you say have been some of the key moments and maybe even key successes that you have seen, either in the last 7 years as Hlanganisa or collectively, if you include the years when you were formerly HIVOS?
So I think there's a lot of conversations that are happening now around just how the philanthropic sector is taking shape. And I mean, a lot of those things have names now. For example, we are calling it strategic philanthropy. We are talking about trust-based philanthropy. And I think there's a lot of us who've been on the other side of grant making, where you're a grant seeker and not the one that's the grant maker. And we've experienced, some of the negative aspects of philanthropy. But you can also see in terms of how sometimes funding doesn't make the difference that, funders hope that it would achieve. And I think it's really inherent in the manner of approach that grant makers use. And so right from the onset, as we became Hlanganisa, we really wanted to add Ubuntu to how we did our grant-making work, allow our partners and sub-grantees to lead us, because we are not the experts. We might have the resources, we might have the capacity, but we are really not the experts in terms of what's happening on the ground. So we've really allowed our sub-grantees to lead us on what's important and how do they see success, how would they be interpreting impact in their own context, because that differs from one context to another. And so we've really done our grant making differently. Our sub-grantees have had a say in terms of, the tools that we use, in terms of, just the sub-grantees that we choose. It's not Hlanganisa that autonomously decides that these are the people we're going to sub-grant, but we have the sector also supporting that process. And I think that has really given us it has earned us a level of trust with our partners. We really see them as our allies, because, sometimes for you to make a change, both partners need to believe that we have their best interest at heart, and I think that's a journey that we've really made progress on.
Yeah. So I think Last week or so, I met you at the Ecto Bumbano meeting, and there seems to be a confluence between what you are saying and what Ecto Bumbano's work is around, especially around the question of northern-based donors who, when they wanted to leave Southern Africa, decided to have an exit strategy that would allow for continuous solidarity to happen. Is HIVOS part of that process, or was the change of HIVOS to Hlanganisa part of a thought-out exit strategy in a way?
So, I mean, in terms of the transition, I think what is natural and what should be natural, I think, for any organization is to always shift to the changing context.
Yeah.
And I think Hlanganisa and HIVOS are no different from that from that kind of change, because I think the needs and how you approach the work differs so vastly, and it requires that kind of change. And I think as Hlanganisa we've been no different in terms of that approach to being now a local intermediary grant maker.
Yeah. And so what would be some of the issues that you would say as Hlanganisa and your community partners are currently facing, or what are the barriers to your work? I mean, every institution will face specific barriers, but also barriers that affect everyone. In your case, what are those specific things that are a bit of a challenge in the implementation of your work?
I think there's a number of them. A significant part of them have to do with resources and how resources are dispersed. I mean, we talk about strategic philanthropy and we talk about social justice, but more and more it's increasingly difficult to get resources over a prolonged period.
Yeah.
So, and for you to actually measure and say we've attained social justice, it takes longer than that. It takes longer than 3 years for you to actually see a real difference on the ground. And I think for me that is, one of the key challenges around just financial resources. And I think sometimes there's a lot of unpaid work that goes into the work that we do, because I mean it costs money, but someone is doing that work. And for me a big challenge is that for community-based organizations especially, is the work that they're doing in the communities is out of passion, is out of a realization of the need, but it's coming at a personal cost to them. And a lot of funding now is really project focused and is not taking into account, some of those issues. And we actually did an audit, a skills audit a couple of years ago amongst our partners, just to see, because the intention of the audit was just to see whether what level of skills people had in the organizations that we're supporting. We wanted to disaggregate that by gender. We wanted to just see what the governance structures look like, what are the capacity needs within those organizations. And actually what we found was that 70% of people that worked in community-based organizations are women.
Yeah.
And not many of them had a higher education beyond matric. Few of them actually had matric. And so we have a sector that is heavily reliant on those people, and that we are not investing in them. But sometimes that doesn't always align with, funders' priorities, just in terms of building capacity. And so I think there's a lot of barriers that we see at a community level, and we've been privileged to work with funders like the Ford Foundation and the Mott Foundation, who've really recognized our value in bridging that gap for our partners.
Yeah. And then Hlanganisa is here at the Passa Conference. What does this space mean for you? And when you leave to attend an event like this annually, what are the objectives from Hlanganisa's perspectives and the communities that may not have the opportunities to actually attend these places? As much as we like it, these spaces are only accessible to a few. And in this case, you are the representative of the communities. So what are the objectives of Hlanganisa in attending these spaces? What do you seek to change or get out of it?
So for us, again, because we are not, the expert in terms of implementing the work, we really are a channel and a loudspeaker for what's happening on the ground. And so for us, it's really to profile the work that's happening on the ground and some of the potential that we see, in terms of the organizations that we work with. So for example, I'll talk about one of the projects that we are currently a part of under the Presidential Employment Stimulus called the Social Employment Fund. And through that project, we've partnered with community-based organizations to employ over 3,000 women to address gender-based violence at a local level. And I think it was really an innovative approach in terms of really addressing a challenge that every day, we are talking about. We are talking about issues of safety and security for women in communities. And so for us to really talk about the work that our partners are doing and just get other funders to recognize the value and the strategic position that community-based organizations have because of their proximity to the problem, they are a big part of the solution that we're trying to find.
Yeah. And then I think since June this year, you've been taking part in the master's degree in African Philanthropy. What has that done to the way you see your work and the way you see the world?
It's been quite a journey. It doesn't feel like it's been a few months only.
Yeah.
I think it's really revolutionized the way that I think about our work, because I think there's something about being in the same space for a period of time. You start to see things through one lens. So it's really challenged me to broaden the way that I think about grant making, because that's been my interest in terms of just grant making that's responsive, that's accessible to communities, particularly to women, approaches on how we fund women-led organizations. But because of my peers that are part of the same program, we are all coming from different sectors, and I think it's really challenged the way that I've thought about my own work. But it's forced me to think about other sectors as well. How the philanthropy sector and higher education intersect, for example. What's the role of government? Things like ethics. But I've also really enjoyed just thinking and, about the work more academically and not from a practitioner's perspective. I think it's also helped me to just recognize, how much of what I consider and take for granted, that it's actually meaningful academic knowledge that I could be contributing to. So it's really, changed the way that I engage with the work that I do. But I think it's also become a good platform for networking and building solidarity with other organizations and other individuals that are part of the program.
Yeah. I mean, we obviously offering this as the first in the continent. This is our second cohort at the master's level. What do you think are some of the gaps that you see in this sector, which institutions like ourselves as academic centers could also be addressing? Of course, we have started with this, set of modules, but the sector is bigger and wider. So hearing from people like yourselves who are on the field would also help us to maybe add more modules or sharpen some of them. So for example, one of the areas that is coming out strongly is that we probably need a specific certificate or program on women in philanthropy. Are there any other gaps that you see that, from a practitioner point of view, but now as a student, you feel, I think we could be also doing something here, there, and there?
So I think one of the one of the things that I've really appreciated about being part of the program is that we've had access to a lot of case studies of organizations that would otherwise not know about. Stories that in many cases just sit with those organizations and no one ever gets to know or just learn from those experiences. And I think for me that's one of the valuable things that I see CAPSI contributing to, in terms of just documenting, the stories of African philanthropy, the innovations, the resilience of organizations, but also the faces of leadership, I think, who've been really integral in terms of, how the shape that philanthropy has taken on the continent. And so for me, the case studies are a big, a big part of, I think, what CAPSI can contribute to in terms of writing the story of African philanthropy. A lot of our development work that we seek to do is also in very poor communities that have not been characterized in academy. Things like informal settlements, and how do you do philanthropy in that context, and who are our allies in that space. Rural communities, for example, it's a one passion of mine that, how can the way that we do grant making in particular in a rural context, how can we shape grant making for a rural context in ways that are accessible. And I think there's not much that we've from a theoretical perspective, that has been focused on that. And so I think those are the two that I can think of for now.
So I want us to, I've been sitting here thinking, how good is it and fascinating it is to speak to you now. And you just told us you're from Gokwe. And for those that have no understanding, can you paint a picture for us? Firstly, where is Gokwe in the world? So that's number one. Because it's fascinating for me to be sitting here and somebody says I'm from Gokwe. I have an understanding of where it is, but I don't think the world understands where Gokwe is. And secondly, I'm excited about showcasing the philanthropy that happens in Gokwe to the world through you. Can you paint a picture for us, first about where is Gokwe located, what does it look like for people that have no idea, and how people survive there? The idea being to showcase the philanthropy that happens at that particular level.
So Gokwe is quite vast. My village, my grandparents' village is in a place called Mapfungauti, a plateau. And it's really a remote village even until now. In fact, one of the things that we wanted to do a number of years ago, about 10 or so years ago, was to get another borehole sunk, because my family has to walk for quite a distance to go to the nearest bore to get clean water. And so one of the things that we wanted to arrange with a couple of us that are from the households that are in the vicinity is to get that borehole sunk. So we started finding, service providers that could help us do that. But in the end, it didn't really work out because they said the road was inaccessible. And so that speaks to, we had a solution about water, but the roads are horrible. And so in a 4x4 car, you can drive from a town called, the nearest town is Kadoma. It can take you about 2.5 hours from Kadoma to my village. Whereas if the roads were fine, it's actually not more than a 45-minute journey. Because we travel longer distances than that in a far shorter time. And so it's really remote in terms of schools. There's only 2 schools. There's a high school and the primary school, Mafungauti Secondary and Maliami Primary. Almost all the homesteads rely on agriculture. For the longest time, it was cotton farming. So also each time I went on holiday, I would be part of weeding and harvesting cotton. And that was the only income that came into the household for the whole year. So also it meant a level of financial planning. But so many people also stay within the house, the homestead. My grandparents, grandchildren, his sister's children, and other people who are just in distress at that time. And you sort of make do with what you have. So you start to learn to share, but you also learn to depend on other households around you. So sometimes if they slaughter a cow in that household, it means that that week you're also going to be having meat because they've slaughtered. But also around the different huts on the homestead, if they are having pap and amasi, others are having meat, others are having vegetables, it means that you have a variety just in terms of, and that's really at a micro level. But because everyone is so dependent on agriculture, we also, we had days where we'd go to the Manamike's field and we'll go and help them to harvest whatever it is that's happening in that season. But then they would also come to us maybe for a day or two on the bigger size fields, to help us with the work. So I think those are some of the early exposures to philanthropy that I had. And back then, I didn't see that as philanthropy. It was just the way that life happened at the village. So it's not like you have anything that you have to yourself. It's really just a communal way of living that I think allowed us a lot of dignity that I think can be, translated into the philanthropic space.
So in your case, how have you been both a philanthropist and a recipient of philanthropy? You've already started talking to some of that. But because most people think philanthropy is something that is done by the super rich, the wealthy, and not see it in their day-to-day lives. So you've just spoken about how in that village, you actually had a lot because the community, it didn't matter if you've got amasi, I've got meat, I've got this. It means everyone now has got a variety because you're all sharing. If somebody is slaughtering, then you know all the homesteads are going to benefit from that. You talked about the concept of amalima, letsema, where if somebody's household needs work to be done or completed, you come as a group. One day you just clear that and then you go to the next, and those are things that communities will take for granted because that's how they are structured. But those are philanthropic interventions because people are giving their time. It's public actions that are done on a voluntary basis to achieve a public good. But we always think that philanthropy is something far fetched. And so in your case, how have you been both a recipient and a philanthropist?
So I think, just by the very nature of where I was born and the kind of social economic context that I grew up in, by nature, you rely on others' philanthropic actions in terms of advancing in your education. But at one time, in terms of, just things like you need accommodation for a particular period, I think there's a lot that I've benefited from others. Is now I always know to use Peyton and Moody's definition of, voluntary action that contributes to public good. And so I've been a recipient, and I think because I've seen the difference that it's made in my own life, I've also intentionally been contributing to that in my own circles, in terms of my own extended family, but also just by spending my time, contributing knowledge, in terms of spaces that I've navigated because I've gone there before. But I think the very fact that I am who I am, a Black African woman, has also been in its own right a philanthropic act, because there are people that identify with me just because of of who I am.
So, and then maybe finally, because we winding down, who is Chiedza? We've been talking to Chiedza, the professional. but now we just want to know Chiedza the person.
So I was just having a conversation a few hours ago with someone here, and that's where I want to start from. So Chiedza is someone who really enjoys one-on-one engagement. So I'm someone who really enjoys to know people's stories, how they got to where they got to. I'm a camper. I'm an avid cricket supporter. I'm a farmer. And I think those are some of the things that I've inherited, growing up.
Yeah.
So I think I enjoy a lot of the outdoors, but I really enjoy, a lot of authentic African experiences that I think have been talked about in a prejudiced way that are really the core of who we are, the core of humanity in terms of how we live our lives. And so, I guess that is me.
Yeah, and for most people, ending up in the philanthropic sector is usually not about money. It's about the passions and stuff. So how did you end up in this sector? What's your background, and how did you end up in this sector? For most people, like I'm saying, it's not really about the money. It's about something that they want to advance.
So I was very fortunate when I completed high school. It was not intentional that I would take a gap year, but I was fortunate to get an internship in an organization in Zimbabwe that's called the Zimbabwe Women's Resource Center and Network. And they had a feminist political education program for young women. It was mostly for young women outside of who just got out of university. But I was fortunate to get there just out of high school. And so it really shaped, I spent a lot of time in the library reading the works of Audre Lorde, a lot of feminist thinkers who gave vocabulary to the way I saw the world but didn't know how to express it. And so from that moment, I decided, after that year, I really decided that this is the space that I wanted to work in because I could make a contribution, from an understanding, from an important ideological perspective, I would say.
Yeah. And then finally, if there are any people in the sector who are still thinking, deciding, hesitating to do some training, professional training in philanthropy, you took the step. What would you want to say to them? And so that would be your camera.
So for me, I would really encourage, anyone who's thinking of making significant contribution to the philanthropic sector to, it's an environment to really learn and explore outside of what you already know, but also get to gain new knowledge about what you don't know. And I think for me, the biggest element of the learning has been what I've been learning from my peers in terms of their own experiences. And so, for me, the program that CAPSI is rolling out is really, it's way ahead of its time. And I think it's something that particularly people that don't know about the philanthropic space and are still trying to find out, what is it. I think there's also a lot of room for people that know that they have the grant-making power to also be part of this program. I think there's a lot that we come with as individuals that is inherent in the way that we do grant-making, and I'm speaking about it from my own experience. And so I'd really just encourage, anyone who's in the philanthropy space to take up, whether it's the short course, the master's program, the post-grad diploma. I think there's really a lot of value in terms of the content of the program, but also the interactions that you have with other students.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chiedza. Really was fascinated by this conversation, partly because, growing up, I always heard about Gokwe, and I'd never set my foot in Gokwe. And one of my best friends, who was a Catholic priest, and came from Gokwe, and one time he took me to Gokwe. So that's why I was so fascinated by that when you mentioned Gokwe. I've been there once, and I think it's always something useful for us to bring stories from the different parts of the world. But essentially, as you were describing, the same story could be said about somebody from the Eastern Cape. Gokwe is in the far-flung parts of Zimbabwe. Somebody from Kenya could also give us the same story. And that, for me, is fascinating because it tells us about the universality of philanthropy, especially for Africans. It's more or less the same, but experienced in different ways. And for us, showcasing that through you and many others is something that we would want to do. So I really want to thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Chiedza Chagutah with Hlanganisa Community Fund, but also a student at CAPSI pursuing a master's degree. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.